Okay, it looks like we still don't have quorum yet, so unfortunately we can't start our meeting, but we can go ahead and still go with the presentation, and I'll send this recording to all of our members who weren't able to make it tonight. And so first, I believe we're going to start with Madison Development Corporation, Lori and Abby. Do you guys want to share your screen, or do you want me to pull up the presentation on mine?
I could share mine, Daphne.
Okay, great.
Are you all looking at the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect.
We're looking at all the individual slides. Might want to just go to the first slide.
Yeah, this is the first slide. You can't see it large?
Yes. Well, we can't see it, can't see it full screen, but we can see it.
Oh,
We're seeing your whole
that?
computer.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you click on the slide itself, maybe it'll make it full size. But either way, that's fine. Hopefully,
Okay.
okay. Hopefully everybody can see it.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Should we get going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay, so I'm Lori Heineman, Madison Development Corporation, and I have with me today Abby Wallhouse, our VP of Finance, and Cashin Laufenberg may come on. We'll see. He has a 3-year-old in the house, so it's quite possible he may not. We wanted to thank you. I don't know if you recall, but the last time we were in front of this Workforce Housing Committee was 2021, and it was to ask for your support on a CDBG disaster recovery grant. We did get that grant, and we'll have happy to share some information on that. So we thank you so much for that. So let's go to the second slide. I know that your time is limited today, so we're going to cover exactly what Daphne asked us to. So talk a little bit about the need for workforce housing, which you all know, a little bit about MDC and how we fit into that, the benefits of nonprofit ownership of workforce housing, the current challenges, or as Daphne would say, the struggles that we face in trying to continue to develop, and then suggested funding priorities for the TIF money should you decide to go down the route of affordable workforce housing. Next slide, please. So again, I know you all know this. Dane County, according to the most recent strategic action plan, needs 139,000 of total workforce housing unit between now and 2040. And of those, 35,000 units are needed for workforce housing. So workforce housing, as you all know, can be defined as housing that's affordable to households, making less than 80% of the area median income. And rent, to be affordable, should be no more than 30% of a person's income. Next slide, please. So about Madison Development Corporation. Well, we are all about affordable workforce housing. We develop it, we own it, we manage it, and we invest in it. So that's our story. Our mission is to provide and finance permanent quality affordable housing in Dane County. We have grown from 24 million to 52 million in assets over the last 8 years, probably because we're a member of the Middleton Chamber of Commerce, right, Abby? They've given us some great discounts. We really appreciate it. We have 13 MDC team members who manage our now 429 units. And we have a 13-member diverse board of directors, and 71% of our tenants, interestingly enough, have incomes under 60% of the AMI. Our vacancy rate is literally less than 1%, often only 0.5%, because we are affordable, and we figured that it's due to the quality of the buildings that we build. And we have a record of success managing both home funds, CDBG, and other grant funds, including the recent $3.3 million CDBG grant from the city of Middleton. Next slide, we're going to go to Abby.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, everyone. Nice to see you. Well, we're here to talk about the current limitations for nonprofit developers, and we thought it'd be informational to show some examples of what nonprofits such as MDC and WHPC are building. MDC's new mill apartments in Middleton at 6908 Century Avenue consists of 52 units, 11 of them reserved for households at or below 50% of the area median income level. Another 28 are rented to households at or below 80% of the area median income. The construction consists of granite countertops, balconies, common areas, an exercise room, luxury plank flooring throughout, underground parking, all of the essentials for workforce housing as well, including a grocery store next door, transportation options, employment opportunities nearby, and excellent schools and parks, as you know, in Middleton. We have only 14 units remaining to be leased out. Here are a few pictures of the mill. Of course, we're biased towards nonprofits because being mission driven, units are likely to be affordable for the long term. Nonprofits do not want to cost burden their tenants, and we strive to keep rents no more than 30% of household income. We also think being locally owned and managed provides a benefit. Nonprofits are less likely to turn units to market rate after the affordability period of any kind of funding runs out. And just talking about the rents a little bit. Yeah.
You want me to go over this chart, Abby,
No,
since I put it
I've
together?
got it. Thank you.
Okay.
These are the rents at the mill compared to other market rate rents in the area. So for a 1 to 2 person household making less than 50% of the area median income, that will be, salary in the low to mid 30,000s for income, and we'll be paying around 1,000 per unit, oftentimes for the studio as low as 800 per unit. At the 80% AMI level, this household is making between the mid 40,000s and mid 70,000s, again, depending on household size. And the rents are in the 1,160 to 1,300 range for a 1-bedroom and less than 1,900 for a 2-bedroom. Even what we are calling market rate at the mill are really less than market, as you would see elsewhere in the same area, at less than 1,500 for a 1-bedroom and less than 2,000 for a 2-bedroom. So as you can see at the bottom here, we do show a few comparables in the area. They're easily 20 to 50% higher than our workforce options. So it's definitely nice to have all sorts of housing levels within a community, and you can see what workforce housing brings to the table. I will turn it back to Lori to talk about current challenges.
Okay, thank you, Abby. And just on that last slide, you can see, the income levels for the market rate basically go from 51,000 to 98,000, where ours, you can actually get a nice 2-bedroom if your income is 78,000, 58 to 78,000. Again, depends on the household side. So I thank you for that comment too, Abby, about the importance of all types of housing. So let's talk about the challenges that we have as a nonprofit workforce housing provider. And this is for all housing providers. The cost to build, high construction costs, availability of materials, high interest rates have pushed the cost per unit from about 190,000 a unit to over 325,000 a unit since 2020. And this is the data from the 9 projects that we funded at the Dane Workforce Housing Fund, which I'll share in a moment. Funding, well, because of this challenge of the high costs, it requires multiple sources to help make projects happen. In the case of our 52-unit mill apartments at 6908 Century Avenue, we had several sources. We had Middleton Area Development Corp. We had the City of Middleton's Community Development Block Grant. We had United Way. We had the Dane Workforce Housing Fund, and we had Forward Community Investments. It really took a lot to put this project together. And we really appreciate, the support from the city on this. Another big barrier for us and what we struggle with is the cost and availability of land on a parcel to build on. Acquiring new land parcels is really often cost prohibitive because of the cost per unit, and trying to make that work is very difficult. Finally, I'll add a friendly note that the city approval process, and this is across all municipalities that we've worked with, is that the process often gets sent from one meeting to the next meeting or delayed if some part isn't in place. And often it takes a good year to 2 years to get full approvals. And we really feel that if the process was streamlined and some types of projects were automatically ready to go to the next step a little bit quicker, that the developers could certainly save a lot of money, which is very important to nonprofit developers who don't have those developer fees coming in. So it's really costing us every single day that the delays go on. And then last but not least, the regulation due to government sources of funds can be really extensive. Abby Atun has been fantastic to work with on our Community Development Disaster Recovery Grant. That particular grant slowed us down by a minimum of 3 months due to waiting for the DOA to respond on things like noise control from the airport, traffic control, things that typically would not have happened other than that government sources of funds. So some other types of funding, like home funds, have relocation expenses, which are really hard if you're trying to redevelop and upgrade your properties. And of course, we have some properties on Allen Boulevard, so it makes it very cost prohibitive to redevelop those. And some have high cost to administer grants. And this is something that we've been working really hard with the city on doing. But we would just suggest that if you do decide to allocate some funding towards workforce housing, which we would be thrilled, try to keep the terms very straightforward and simple. There's enough regulations already on housing and making sure that everything is in order. It would just really make a huge difference for us. So then I'll go to the next slide. And this is really tiny and hard to read. So I'll just say the blue bars are the cost to build, and the orange bars are the value. And if you look at some of our projects back in 2020, the cost and the value were pretty close. And this is always going to be the case in affordable housing because our rents are rent controlled based on income. But if you can see the difference of what's happened here in the last 3 deals we did in 2023, the gap has widened vastly. So you put in, 15 million into the project, and day one, the day that you open it, it's only worth 11 million. So that's why having nonprofit ownership for the long term is really, really critical and important, because we will keep these projects affordable long after the LURA expires. Next page, please. So
Yes, I think I'm going to take this one, right, Lori?
that's yours, Abby.
This slide is meant to show some funding suggestions that would help the current demand versus supply issues for workforce housing. And these are all issues your group has been dealing with. We need to create new workforce units. At the same time, we need to rehab existing affordable units to keep them livable, attractive, and affordable. Like the Federal Home Loan Bank process, we suggest giving priority, or in their case, more points, to nonprofits with a majority ownership in the project, maximizing the likelihood of affordability for the long term. Awards really should be large enough to make a true impact. With current financing challenges, we really appreciate awards at the $1 million or more level to really make a project happen. It's kind of a true but for, receiving 200,000 is great, but if the compliance costs, a whole staff person, it's a bit of a toss. So really having an award level that truly makes a project happen is wonderful. Making the numbers work on a smaller missing middle project is also really a challenge. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago prioritizes projects with 24 or fewer total units. But in our area in Dade County, I really think we could see that at 55 or fewer units, since making the numbers really work on the smaller type developments is difficult. And lastly, process. In one of my past careers, I was a process manager, so I always appreciate a good process and with defined criteria to ensure objectivity in any awards process. And I'll go to the next slide here. So we all know Middleton is a desirable place to live and work, and we also know desirable neighborhoods are becoming less and less affordable. Your group certainly knows the issues and is prioritizing workforce housing, and so are we. Nonprofits specifically need help filling the financing gaps to make a dent in the shortage of workforce housing. And employers are more likely to retain and attract talent if there are reasonably priced quality housing options in the area. So we definitely appreciate you inviting us and listening to what we have to say about nonprofits. I will turn it back to Lori for a quick conclusion.
Well, this is just the team that helped us finance the 52 unit, which is called the Mill Apartments. And I want to invite you all to come and see our property. We are having a ribbon cutting at noon on this Thursday, the 19th at 6908 Century Avenue. We will be having DOA Secretary Kathy Blumenfeld there, as well as Mayor Emily Kuhn will be there. So we're excited. You're welcome to come. We will have several units open. As you know, we only have 14 of the 52 left, but we will be happy to give tours right after the ribbon cutting. The ribbon cutting goes from like 12 to 12:30, and then tours will be afterwards. So we hope to see you there. And if you have any questions, let us know.
Thanks so much, Lori and Abby. We can maybe hold off some questions until after Matt goes. Go ahead, Matt, if you want to share your screen, or I can share the presentation.
I'll start by trying to share mine, and if I run into any problems, maybe I'll pass it back to you.
Sure.
Yeah. Can you all see my screen?
Not yet.
But now.
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, I'm gonna try and make it bigger. And hopefully that doesn't, did it move? I'm gonna hit escape on that and just stay on the same screen that Lori had. Good evening, my name is Matt Childress. I'm a Development and Acquisitions Manager at WHPC. I've been here for about 4 years. And prior to that, I spent about 8 years of my career working at the State Housing Authority, WHEDA, in the multifamily production group. And the last job I had there was writing the qualified allocation plan and managing the tax credit program. Owning and developing affordable housing used to be a challenge. Now it's an incredible maze of problems to attempt to solve. And I'm really happy that you all invited us here tonight so we could have an opportunity to talk. I want to stick more high level. I'll talk about some of the examples of our investments in Middleton and Madison in general. But at a high level, WHPC is the largest owner of affordable housing in the state of Wisconsin. We own about 9,000 units. They exist in 57 of the 72 counties. With that comes an average age of the portfolio of about 45 years. And one of our strategic things we've been working on is buying or building a younger housing stock. So we have 2 active new construction projects. We're closing on a 15-year-old building later this month. We have a new strategic vision to reinvest in younger, less aged housing stock to diversify our investments. And we are headquartered here in Madison, Wisconsin, and a lot of the new activity we've been looking at has been focused in Dane County specifically. Who we serve on average, it's typically low-income earners. And we also house a lot of seniors or adults with mental and physical disabilities. One of the things I do want to talk about is kind of housing crisis. 62% of the working population in Wisconsin makes $22 an hour or less. When you talk about workforce housing definitions, Lori's group just got done talking about 50% units. Well, $22 an hour qualifies for 50% rents in Dane County. Only about a third of those who qualify for affordable housing can actually find it. And Lori talked about it quite a bit. You know, that introduces this idea of cost burden. Is more than 30% of your monthly paycheck going towards rent? These are all things, macro challenges that we look at on a daily basis. And we like to think that any of the investments that WHPC does in our local communities and any profits we make from that goes right back into either reinvesting in our affordable housing projects or buying or building new to help solve some of the supply problem. We don't have a for-profit owner where the money is getting siphoned off. All reinvestments either go into the portfolio or they go into growth strategies. One of the things I want to talk about is typically the people who are the most rent burdened are those people who earn between 0 and 30% of the area median income. A fairly common stat they talk about is only 34 out of 100 people looking in that income band, only 34 can find housing solutions. And what happens is they end up renting up. And when I say that, someone who qualifies for a 30% unit, they might be, well, they couldn't get on the list quick enough to get into a 30% unit. So now they're looking at the 50% unit or the 60% unit or the 80% unit. And our portfolio is very diversified. We have units at the 30% band, but we are looking at investments across all of these bands, because the slide you have in front of you references kind of Wisconsin in general. But when you talk about Dane County, these pressures can become even more real. There's a lot of people who want to move here, a lot of people who want to work here, and Dane County is experiencing a significant kind of supply issues when it comes to housing. And like I said, a lot of our more recent investments have been specifically targeted at Dane County as a result. Here's an example. This is one of those deals Lori was talking about. In 2019, WHPC became involved with this transaction. We partnered with an emerging developer who got a little too far out ahead of himself, and we ended up partnering on the transaction to take a concept that was a great concept, workforce housing on University Avenue in Middleton, 39 unit, but to MDC's point, this was constructed at $190,000 a unit. If we wanted to build that today, it'd be easily 15 to 20% higher, if not more. So what we used to be able to do 4 short years ago takes a lot more sources to figure out. I'll give you an example. A lot of the lending products that we rely upon are directly tied to the federal funds rate. I mean, if you watch any news, people probably know who Jerome Powell is. They probably didn't used to know who he was. He's a pretty popular person when they talk about rate hikes or maybe even a rate cut in the near future. But what happened to our country, and more specifically housing, was they increased the federal fund rates at a historically high level in a very short amount of time. So if you look at those rate bumps that are occurring, at the end of 2021, you used to be able to get a permanent loan in the 3% range. And by the end of that rate hike extravaganza that happened over like 8 to 9 months, your rate doubled. And when we talk, I'll just talk in plain terms. When we look at something like a tax credit project that might have like 70 units in Dane County, the permanent loan just shrunk over an 8-month period, $1 million on a 70-unit project. That is nothing that a developer did. It just means that it's more expensive to borrow. The hard costs on that transaction would go up similarly. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm going to keep coming back to this kind of case study of maybe a 70-unit transaction. Typically, you can fit a 70-unit new construction build on an acre and a half. You can find those getting more readily permitted and moving forward because they're just large enough to absorb a lot of sunk costs. But that same type of deal, the construction loan itself, also would have increased 200 to 300%. And that equates to another $300,000 to $400,000. So just from lending alone, a 70 unit is now carrying $1.5 million gap. And that was specifically just tied to macroeconomic policy. I want to kind of toggle between, macroeconomic and real things that WHPC is doing. We ended up buying Trotta Apartments in Middleton. We approached the city. We restructured the transaction. We introduced more affordability. And I'll just speak plainly. I believe that this opportunity became available to WHPC because the permanent loan was much lower than the original developer. The loan amount that they could get just because the interest rate increased in such a short amount of time put them into a situation where they became a motivated seller. Normally, they would have kept that asset. That's my opinion. And these are the types of challenges that WHPC is up to the challenge. We worked with Middleton to talk through different options. We brought a significant grant source that we were able to provide to the transaction. But you are taking deals that used to be more straightforward in your community, and they are much more challenging to figure out. And a large component of that, I'll just go back to the slide, is this interest rate. The interest rate alone is kind of wreaking havoc on new construction development. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about was this idea of inflation, and as it pertains to like the operating budget of a real estate project. So when I say that, operating budget means like how many full-time people are you paying to work at your building? Service providers, janitorial, trash hauling, insurance, you name it. We've seen double-digit increases in expenses, and largely the way that owners and operators and developers are balancing that is in the form of rent increases. So inflation's real, but largely developers are passing on that cost to the renter where it's possible. That does not solve the interest rate problem. All that does is kind of bring you back into balance with, well, the operating budget costs more. How do I solve for that piece? And a lot of people are passing it on in the form of rent increases. Material costs. This is the kind of cost data we were talking about. Our Kestrel project was at $190,000. That was a pre-2020 construction contract we entered into. 24, 25% higher on average over a 4-year period. What's really nice is the chart on the right talks through kind of a stabilization that's occurring. I interpret that to mean there's more consistency in raw materials, and then potentially a weakening of contractor pipelines. People are a little bit more hungry, but we don't forecast a revision to pre-2020 costs. We just forecast a stabilization or more predictable cost increases. And when you talk about a 24% increase in the budget, if we talk through that 70 unit example, if I like pre-2020 versus post like 2023 numbers, that introduces $1.5 million or $2 million of extra costs. If you combine that with $1.5 million of permanent loan and construction lending, now you're up to $3.5 million gap on a deal that used to work very straightforward. So when you talk about how do you invest in your communities, it's really that idea of solving for a gap. Lori and others at MDC talked through deals are much more complicated. You will see 3, 4, 5. One of the tax credit deals that I'm going to show you had 9 project sources by the time we were done trying to solve for it. And I applaud the efforts of your committee to consider investing in affordable housing, because but for those gap sources, macroeconomic conditions have made it an incredible challenge to try and solve for. And at the end of the day, what that means in general is the supply issue in Dane County is real. We need more housing product, and the same tools that have always been available are just producing fewer units. So that is a long way to describe the challenge at hand. This transaction you see in front of us, it's not Middleton, but it's in Madison on East Washington. It's the old Bimbo Bakery site on the corner of Fair Oaks and East Washington. It abuts an elementary school. It's going to be fronted by bus rapid transit. It has a community health clinic right across the street. These are the types of investments that WHPC as a nonprofit owner looks to make. But that deal was, we started in April of 2021 and we closed in December of 2022, and we will open in 2025. and it's been quite a wild ride. Originally, we were going to have 3 to 4 project sources, and now we have 9 project sources. And those are the types of challenges that are real and that are in front of us. And I do want to say, you know, on our RISE transaction, we utilized TIF. We approached the city of Madison. They created a TIF district for us. The increment that we were generating on that, given it was vacant manufacturing prior to our involvement, was real and significant. So as you consider how you invest in affordable housing, a lot of these deals in Dane County can be genuine revenue increment generators for your community as well. And then I do want to end talking about a lot of the same flavor of what MDC was talking about, maybe just kind of displayed in a different way. A lot of the work that we do in the workforce housing space is in that 50 to 80% band. And then we also layer in upwards of 25% of the units at market rate housing. And if you look at it, like, people have a lot of preconceived notions about what affordable housing means or what workforce housing means, but 50% family of twos paid $48,000, 80% upwards of $80,000 a year. We have very diverse populations that we house. The project that we were showing on the prior screen, we're mixing an age-restricted building in with general occupancy buildings. We like to try and develop housing ecosystems that help your community. And I'll kind of end it by saying every dollar that you can keep from someone having to pay towards rent is more money that they can reinvest in your local community. And like, gap tools are ideal. I will follow MDC's lead in saying nonprofits invest differentially. All of the profits go back into the expansion of affordable housing primarily. WHPC has never sold an asset. And I will also echo her comments that if you're going to make meaningful investments into affordable housing, be certain that you're not overly prescriptive in the requirements or requests that come with the money. A lot of other communities that we've come into, they may be willing to make an investment, but as we start contemplating the costs of some of the requirements to access the funds, they might end up being 50 cents on the dollar as compared to the investment. So I would urge you to take some of those data points that I was walking you through on a case study, kind of 70 unit development. It's really an issue of trying to solve for a gap. And to the extent that you can keep the money nimble, I would urge you to take that approach. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Matt. That was really helpful. Thanks, Lori and Abby, again for sharing as well. If anyone on the committee has any questions or comments they would like to ask, feel free to go ahead.
Mine would be for Lori and Abby and probably Matt too, but are there any, you mentioned bouncing from meeting to meeting for city approval process, but what specifically in the process has caused delays for projects that you've worked on in Middleton?
So I could give a couple of examples. The CDBG disaster recovery grant was great to get. However, when we tried to get the city approvals to move forward with construction, an environmental review, an extensive environmental review beyond the standard environmental review that every developer does was required. So that took the state about 8 weeks to complete that. And this happened to be in May and June, which is when you want to break ground. And then when that was approved, they decided that they were going to do a noise traffic study. And I believe Daphne and Abby were involved with that, with the airport, saying that the airport noise was too loud to build a building there, even though our project is next to Metro Market. So I called Jacob Klein, talked to him. His are right across from the airport. He never had that problem with HUD. So these were things that just kind of came up. And then after we, the city did an excellent job, Daphne and Abby, resolving that with the HUD. Then a next one came up and said the traffic count is too high in the city of Middleton on Century Avenue, and therefore they had to do a complete study for that. Now we're at late June, early July. So we were able to respond and get the data, but those were very difficult. Other things that were a challenge was the fact that engineering has to work with the state also slowed things down because of certain expertise that the Department of Safety and Professional Services have, that the Middleton, because of the size of the Middleton staff, they outsource, which is fine. And they did a great job connecting us, but it stalled at the state several times. So that cost, that just delay in cost probably cost us about $500,000 to $1 million.
But Alan, to your point, those were mostly DOA and state related
state,
delays, not City of Middleton.
Right. That's why we're so excited about City of Middleton having money, because we love working with the City of Middleton. You guys are great to work with. I mean, I feel like I know everybody down in the engineering department and, and they're great. I got my free poster from the Dane County in your offices. So the City of Middleton's great. It wasn't the fact that you applied for this grant, we were very thankful, but the regulatory slowdowns were all based on the state and their response. So we worked closely with the city to kind of speed those up as much as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, follow up on Alan's question. I appreciate your comments there. Have you seen examples, though, of other municipalities that have kind of figured some things out or found some good ways to make things more streamlined that we can learn from?
I'll send that to Abby.
Well, I have an example of something that isn't streamlined. Maybe I'll start with that. We've, as Lori said, we have received home funds from the city of Madison on a couple of projects. And our most recent project with them, they've required us to put money aside to pay subs in the event that they weren't getting paid. And our project opened almost a year ago now, and they haven't released those funds. So there's just been a delay on that. I'm sure policy is created once somebody gets burnt on something. There must have been a project between our two projects that the subs weren't getting paid. So this new requirement to put money aside happened and whatnot. But overall, the approval process for the funding with the home funds is quite smooth. We submit the receipts and documentation online to the city of Madison, and the money later in the same week just shows up in our account. So I would say that's pretty smooth. What isn't as smooth, as Lori alluded to, and so did Matt from WHPC, is the compliance piece of it. We have a compliance manager on staff at MDC, and that's all she does is home fund compliance, because to rent out a home funded unit, it takes significantly more time than just a restricted unit for the same AMI household, if that makes sense. So if you have a unit that you're renting to because of our mission or because of our tax exemption, if we're renting a unit to a household that's at the 50% AMI level, we do the income check, we do all of that. But if it's a home unit at the same level, it's significantly more work to rent that same unit. So that's just a plug for the compliance piece on streamlining that process. Lori, Matt, anything to add to that?
I would just add that the process for the city has been streamlined a little bit on affordable workforce housing projects, that, if you get a certain amount of your project designed, you can just actually bypass some of the committees and go right to planning commission or urban design. So that's pretty new with the city of Madison. We're just starting on a new development now with them. So I wanted to say something positive. The city's been a great, great.
Oh, they have been a great
recent.
partner, and the
Yeah.
zoning is much friendlier as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
zoning's great.
the
Yeah.
zoning has caught up with the times to prioritize workforce housing. So your question was, what are other people doing right? And I'd say City of Madison's doing a lot right. The only negative is that you know, setting the money aside doesn't seem to be quite worked out yet.
So this comment's for Alan and Ben. On our Trata transaction, we were approached in November and we closed in December, and that was only because the city was able to modify the existing TIF agreement and exchange it for what I thought was mutually beneficial pilot agreement. So kudos to your group. That's an example of responding very quickly to a developer's need and request. It was pretty extraordinary. In terms of Middleton and how you're forward thinking, one of the things I would like to highlight that you guys, I think you got right, was the office park out by John Q. Hammonds. You guys share a border with the city of Madison, and you guys are being forward thinking and thinking about housing solutions in areas that were traditionally office or hotel. Similar conversations with other municipalities haven't gone quite as planned as our country thinks about office space in different ways.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Another question I had is, what kinds of metrics do you think the city should use in evaluating the success of those gap dollars? Is it how many units we get for dollars in a project? Is it like units per dollar, workers per dollar? How could we say, oh, this project that we contributed X number of dollars to got us this kind of benefit, whereas that project got us another kind of benefit? What are some of the metrics we should use to evaluate the success of those projects?
Lori,
do you want to go first?
Well, I would say
Workforce Housing Fund has a lot of metrics you might lean on.
we're the last money in. Remember, we're the last money in at the housing fund. So that's a pretty low amount per unit. So the Dane Workforce Housing Fund, we're the last money in. If that project's not going to get done, we are the last money in. So that's about 20 to 25,000 per unit. However, if you look at the cost, with the costs going up, we're definitely, reconsidering that on Fund 2. But on a cost per unit, like the home funds, which are through HUD, it's allocated to the city. In the case of City of Madison, it used to be a maximum per unit of like 90,000. Now it's over, I believe, over 200,000 per unit. Am I right, Abby? So due to the cost increase, so it's like over 200,000 per unit, and it had some other criteria that's tied to it. We're happy to, share what we can on that. But then that's the core money for a nonprofit to be able to get that allocation with a high per unit to be able to get the loan amount down. But, I don't have anything more specific, but my guess is you do, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, you can
And
look
I
at
think,
it.
Alan, you
Oh,
could
go ahead,
also,
Abby.
oh, sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
I think you could also take credit for if you're bringing a project to market, but you're giving a set amount per unit, but the project is actually bringing more affordability. You're getting the project done by putting that money in. So, for example, in our mill project, the 52 unit, we're required to have, for our funding sources, 30 units rented to households at 80% or under. Well, in reality, we'll have 39 units rented to households because we're a nonprofit and we want to keep tax exemption and whatnot. So even though the funding is only tied to a certain number of units, by getting the project done, you may be bringing more units to market. And I think that's a measure to report too, that project was completed because of the funding.
maybe I can build upon some of the comments. Typically when people are designing applications for subsidy for affordable housing, it won't just be like one category you're scoring. So you'll typically develop, a range of categories to kind of diversify some of the policy goals you're looking for. So I think it's really important for your community to understand exactly what type of population you're intending to serve with the dollars and craft some of the categories in that fashion. A lot of the things that I've seen is kind of heat map approach, where it's like within this area you get more points, maybe because we want to see more housing in these very specific portions of our community. And then subsidy per unit is typically something that people kind of consider. But whenever I'm thinking about TIF, you have to balance that against kind of increment and, what type of revenue is that project generating. So delicate balance. I don't feel like I gave you any really good concrete examples, but I don't recreate the wheel,
Another thing that makes a big difference for us, especially in Dane County, is the tax exemption. So if you're really trying to encourage development in a certain area, keeping to the state's model of just paying taxes on the market rate units really can help a project, instead of having pay taxes on the market rate unit and then something else on the affordable units. When our developments only have taxes on the market rate units, we're just encouraged to have more of them be affordable, of course. So
I guess I would add one final thing to that. I've seen a lot of TIF developer agreements in the state include language that you can't sell or assign interest to an entity that intends to take a property tax exempt. If you want to work with nonprofits, I would urge you to not include that language in a TIF developer agreement.
Matt, you mentioned sort of kind of targeting or kind of what we're trying to focus on. I think when we saw a presentation a couple weeks ago, and maybe someone can keep me honest here, or a couple meetings ago, I'm sorry, and someone keep me honest here if I got this right, but I think it was with Kurt Paulson where he mentioned, broke down sort of the supply and gap by income level. Yep. And you had the chart before about like 100 available units for 350 or so people who need it, and his chart showed that that's really more precisely at the 30 to 50%, like around 80%. There wasn't really much a gap, and they say, it doesn't mean that going future there might be a gap, but there wasn't much of a gap, about 80%. Once you got at the market rate, there's actually a gap again, right? So is that what both all your experiences kind of align to too? Is that where the biggest gap is, and is that the toughest to develop too? I would imagine.
I'll try my best to not make too many comments about Kurt. I think Kurt knows more about housing supply than I'll ever know in my life, number one. But
we encourage comments about Kurt, by the way.
yeah, he's a friend of mine. So yeah, he's correct that the 80% does not suffer the same type of gap, but not all communities in Dane County or Wisconsin are created equally. So that's why I was urging you to consider your own housing needs. I believe his slide is probably fairly general. I don't know if that's true of Middleton proper. Middleton's a fairly tight market, and a lot of people want to live there.
I would just add, those 80% units and versus the market units on that chart that we did, because we have to follow rent charts and, keep them affordable. When the costs spike up like they have in the last couple of years, we really can't raise our rents to reflect our additional costs. Whereas a market rate developer can and does do that all the time, because if the Middleton real estate taxes go up on a market rate project, they're going to pass that right through to their tenants. Whereas we don't really have the ability to do that because we've got these rent controls through a land use restriction agreement. So that's why we're very good stewards of trying to keep things, very affordable for people. Not only because, it's in our best interest to have the tax exemption on several units, which I believe it's on 39 units, Abby, out of our 52. So it's in our, because that goes right to the tenant savings. That's how we're able to have our rates lower, plus the fact that we got a grant.
And
Yes, we're allowed under tax exemption to have no more than 25% of the building rented to households who make above or at market. And so we allow our housing division to rent those. Oftentimes they rent fewer than that because, certainly it's our mission to try to do that. Certainly the market rate ones help the numbers a little bit, but if we can get to that 80% or below, we'll try to do that.
so Ben, to kind of follow up on your question a bit further, one of the requirements when we accessed City of Madison TIF funding was that we had a decided investment in some 30% units. And I wholeheartedly believe in the mission of creating 30% units. That's why I work at WHPC. But when you think about it just like a math problem, you just watered down the value of the subsidy. If you're going to give me dollars, but then ask for a really skinny rent unit, the impact is not nearly as great in solving a gap. So that's why I was urging you to be kind of sensitive in how you prescribe what you're looking for when you're asking, like, hey, I'll give you TIF, but we're going to give you a bunch of points for creating 30% units, for example. That's a specific example of how the value of the subsidy might get diminished.
I would also make that argument for the larger unit sizes. I don't know if you could speak to that too, Matt, but we have trouble making the numbers work. We hear often, oh, we need 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, we need larger units. But when you look at the rent charts and who you have to put in those units and the square footage, you could have a design for a 54 unit, but if you want to add a lot of 3-bedrooms, that might take that same square footage down to 44 units. So you're helping fewer households, and is the demand really there for the 3-bedrooms? And we have a lot of trouble trying to fill some of the larger units with the rent charts.
I agree with that sentiment. Our RISE project, we have a range from 1 to 3 bedrooms, and resultingly our cost per unit was a little bit higher.
I think that's great insight on the demand, because it's sort of that kind of that conventional wisdom that workforce family housing is you need 3-bedroom, but if the demand's not, the data doesn't support that, then it's important to know.
And I like that phrase of what diminishes the value of the subsidy. I think those are some of those items are things that we want to try to avoid.
It's difficult, it's a delicate balancing act.
It sounds like the two that I heard were like requirements on kind of the band of affordability, considering 30, 50, 60% AMI, and then the requirement on unit types. Those are kind of two easy examples.
Yeah, we've seen some other communities will say, yeah, we'll make some municipal dollars available, but we want you to invest X amount in green initiatives. That can diminish the value of the subsidy. We've seen some other ones say, we'd like you to take people off the coordinated entry list to help solve homelessness. That typically introduces a lot more expense into your operating budget. Those are examples of what I was talking about.
And I would add the compliance to the subsidy as well, both during construction and post-construction. If the land use restriction agreement is 15, 20 years, but whatever, I think the compliance during construction makes a difference, and then what the burden of proof is after construction as well.
Another interesting data point oops, just a second, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, another interesting data point that we've started to measure through the Dane Workforce Housing Fund, and of course, we have 3 projects for Middleton in that fund. It's just the employers, and we're gonna eventually share that with people once we get it from all of them. But just in our 52 unit alone, we've got a couple of teachers from the Cross Plains School District. We have people that work at restaurants, people that work at UW Health, the VA hospital, handyman, people that work at car dealerships, TV channels. It's really a wonderful group of people. I've gotten to meet lots of them, and it's just great to see they're thrilled with the apartments, and it's just nice to see that they found a place that's affordable and that's convenient for them.
I think one more thing that would diminish as we're talking about that is the length for, if it's an application process, the length between application and award. We didn't have a crystal ball when we were applying for funding for our 52 unit. So we went through the Dane County process. We went through the CDBG DR process. As Lori mentioned, we have a loan from United Way, MADC. Well, some of these processes you apply for in the spring and they're awarded in the fall. And during that time, when we were contemplating this project, of course, you saw Matt's chart where the interest rates went, right? We would have been a lot better off if we had just started and not waited for any of those processes. Now, it could work in the reverse if interest rates are starting to come down, but that one, it's hard to have hindsight on where we could have been had we just started versus waited for some of these approval processes.
I was gonna ask if there were organizations that coordinate, the applications and fundings for all these different funding sources, but then I realized it's you, so, yeah.
Deadlines are the same for a lot of these, so it doesn't even, we do all of our own applications for Federal Home Loan Bank and city and home funds, and the deadlines are the same, and that's what slows it down. So if you have the flexibility to make it a faster turnaround, which is what Abby Attune did for the second CDBG grant, that certainly made it much more feasible.
And to give you some specific feedback, if your community decides that, pairing a TIF subsidy with like a tax credit development is a good kind of way to build leverage, to Lori and Abby's point, try and make sure you have an award decision ahead of the WIDA application phase. So go out, kind of do a little bit of research on when apps are due and try and set up your scoring or application phase to align with that. It raises your odds as a community.
And can I add to that at the end of the 30-year period, yet the nonprofit has a right to buy the property, the first right, because that keeps it affordable.
Yep.
Versus having investors, for-profit investors coming in and putting the place up for sale for market. And now you're just recreating the problem. Now you've lost a big project that's going to go to market. But it can be written in the documents right up front to make those nonprofits have first right.
Well, and I think that's an important distinction. You do see a lot of LIHTC tax credit projects with a nonprofit partner, and having that first right of refusal is great. But our model is typically we're developing on our own. So we're a nonprofit by ourselves. So giving us a tax break, it has to look a little different if you were dealing with a nonprofit who's 100% the developer, the owner, the manager. What does that look like? That has to be a little different, creative.
All right, Daphne, should we close it out here?
Yeah, since we never started a meeting, we don't have anything to end. But thank you so much again for Lori, Abby, and
Thank you,
Matt
Lori.
for
Thank you,
joining
Abby.
us.
Thank
and-
you, Matt.
Thank you
Yeah.
all. Appreciate your time. Noon on the 19th. Watch for your email. It's coming out tomorrow.
Cool.
All right.
Have a good
Okay.
night.
All right, you
Alright.
too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, Robert, for
Bye.
joining too.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.